When approaching a game of 40k, if terrain is merely an afterthought, then you're giving up a massive edge to your opponent. Hello and welcome to Incursion Tactics. Today I will be mostly talking about terrain. It has the biggest impact on our games of 40k, but time and time again I see players trip themselves up by not taking the time to understand how it all works. This leads to misplays, feel bads, and ultimately the potential to ruin a game that we've invested time and effort to enjoy. So we're going to cover off some of the core concepts of terrain, and so by the end of this video you'll have a really solid grasp of all the terrain rules, how they interact with your army, so that you can level up your games and have a better time on the battlefield. Let's get started. So what does terrain do? Broadly speaking, it affects how our models can move in the game, and it gives us the benefit of cover. Benefit of cover is a really simple rule that's found on page 44 of the rulebook. Ultimately, you add 1 to armor saving throws against ranged attacks. So this doesn't work in close combat, it's only if you're being shot at, and it doesn't apply to models with a save of 3+ or better against attacks that don't have an AP, and you can't stack it. So this special rule is really important to remember, as we'll go through all the terrain types. They provide the benefit of cover, and so this is what that is referring to. Terrain can also affect movement, and this is outlined initially on page 15 of the rulebook. And it gives us a catch-all movement rule, which we can apply to any terrain feature. And ultimately the height of any terrain feature plays a really important part in how our models can move through it. A model can be moved over any terrain feature that is 2 inches or less in height. So it's not less than 2 inches, it's 2 inches or less, which is a really important distinction to make. And they can move through those terrain features as if they're not there. So this is a really great rule if you're trying to create an immersive battlefield, but one that doesn't affect how you kind of get through the game, which is really, really good. So you can move through those, and anything more than 2 inches can't be passed through. But if a terrain feature is more than 2 inches, then you can start to use vertical movement to go over that terrain feature, as illustrated by this diagram here. So the building is taller than 2 inches, so you've got the vertical distance of 3 inches that you've got to factor into that part of the model's movement. If you don't have enough movement, you won't be able to complete that move. So far, so simple. Terrain features can give you the benefit of cover, and if they're more than 2 inches tall, they will require you to spend movement to go up and over those terrain features. The next core concept when it comes to the terrain is visibility and determining how much of a model we can see. I'm not going to elaborate too much on the page here. Either you're visible or you're fully visible. It's as simple as that. And you can break that down on a model by model basis or a unit basis. So each individual model is either visible or fully visible, as described on the pages here I've lifted from the rulebook, or the unit as a whole is visible or fully visible, i.e. you can see some of the unit or all of the unit. There's not really any more to add here, but as the terrain rules reference visibility, just understanding this is important to that. First up, we have a really easy one, craters and rubble. So the movement to go through craters, as described on page 15, is not going to restrict your movement because it's going to be less than 2 inches high. Normal visibility rules, as mentioned, apply, i.e. can you see the model or the unit, and infantry models get the benefit of cover from ranged attack, provided they are wholly within this terrain feature. It says wholly on top of on this one, which is an unusual choice of words given most of the time when they're referencing things it's wholly within or within rather than on top of, but it means the same thing. You've got to be in the terrain feature, fully within it, fully on top of it, and you'll get the benefit of the cover if you're an infantry model. So really nice simple one, adds a little extra bonus to cover saves for infantry. Then we have barricades and fuel pipes, any kind of barrier. Models can move up and over and down the terrain feature, of course, but they can't end up on top of it or end their move on top of it or set up on top of these things. Normal visibility rules apply, and because these can be quite thick pieces of terrain, it's nice to see the engagement range rules here, where they essentially have extended your ability to be in combat with another unit if you're on opposite sides of the barricade, so that you can fight sort of over the barricade, which is quite thematic and cool. And so it's a good one to watch out for with this, that if you're on one side of the terrain feature, that the enemy units can be within engagement range further away than what you might normally be used to, because they can still make a charge against that enemy unit provided that they end their charge move as close as possible to the terrain feature and within 2 inches of that enemy unit, and then be able to fight through the barricade as long as they're within 2 inches of the enemy, rather than having the normal engagement range of an inch and having to be ultimately a lot closer. So this is a nice little rule that makes these very playable and prevents them being a real pain in the backside, adding an extra hurdle as you get into combat. Whereas in reality, you just hop the wall and fight through the wall, etc. So it's a really important one to be aware of when you're planning out your turns and making sure you're not getting too close to the enemy if you don't want to get charged. And again, barricades and fuel pipes, similar to the craters, provide the benefit of cover to only infantry models, but they have to be wholly within 3 inches of the barricade or the pipe, and only if they are not fully visible to the attacking unit because of the terrain feature. Next up we have battlefield debris and statuary. Quite a lot of things could fit into this category, but the way movement works with these things is you can go up and over them, but again we can't stop on top of this terrain feature or begin the game on top of it. And they also give the benefit of cover. If when we're resolving a ranged attack against an enemy model, if that model is not fully visible to every model in our attacking unit because of the terrain feature, then that model has the benefit of cover against that attack. And it's not just limited to infantry. These bigger pieces of terrain are actually starting to impact more things, which is really, really good. So the bigger creatures like monsters and vehicles are starting to benefit from the cover from these kinds of things, which is nice, which works in exactly the same way for hills. Hills are very similar in that you can go up and over them, but instead you can end on top of them and start the game on top of them, provided that you're not overhanging any part of that model that would normally be in contact with the ground. And hills can vary in size and shape, but ultimately it's got to sit neatly fully on the hill and not be hanging off. If you're enjoying this content, then consider joining the Incursion. For $2.99 a month, you get access to an additional video every week. And now I am pleased to say I have teamed up with Epic Flail to offer an awesome Discord too. Epic Flail do some live streams. They've streamed the events that I run outside of the YouTube channel. I also run wargaming events, and Paul at Epic Flail has been doing some awesome streaming content of that. He does a Meta Monday show every week. Awesome community. And we decided that rather than offer something separate, that any member of either channel could access that Discord. It's very, very lively and has lots of things going on, from a spicy meme section to list advice. We get some TTS going on. It's a really great community, and I'm really pleased to be able to offer out that Discord access as part of a perk for this channel as well. A massive thank you to you if you are a member already. It really means a lot. It really helps to get the videos out, and really appreciate your ongoing support. Woods are fairly simple. They basically give the benefit of cover if you're inside the wood, unless you're towering or an aircraft, which makes perfect sense. Need to agree upon or understand what the outline of the terrain feature is to be able to be within the wood. And like the other features, if a model is not fully visible because of this terrain feature, then it grants the benefit of cover as well. So a nice simple terrain feature. It doesn't impede movement in any way as well, as described on page 15, because the woods, even though the trees are quite tall, the actual sort of wooded area itself is not more than 2 inches tall, and so you just move through it, move the trees out of the way, or just go through the trees, ignore them. And then we have ruins. This feature again needs to have a defined area. That's the boundary of the terrain at ground level, so you know if you are wholly within or within the terrain feature. If the terrain's mounted on a base, it's very, very obvious what that footprint is. Ruins also give an additional rule: if you're shooting from up on high, then you get an additional AP on your guns, which is really nasty. And models can't move through ruin walls unless they have the infantry or beast keyword, meaning that this terrain feature can do a very good job of blocking non-infantry and beast models from certain parts of the board if you've positioned carefully, or if you're just trying to get around the corner of a wall to make a charge, for example. It can be quite frustrating, and so this is a really important rule to be aware of, because infantry and beasts can just run around through ruin walls, not care about it, but some of the bigger units in the game, this particularly affects super heavies like stompers, bane blades, things of that nature. But even something like a Lehman Russ or a Demon Primarch is going to struggle sometimes to navigate around these ruin walls, and so you've got to be really careful when you're moving and planning your turns that ruins don't affect your movement and stop you getting from where you need to be. One big thing that's worth noting about this rule that I see misplayed so often is people will suggest that a model that's not infantry or a beast cannot move through a ruin wall that's 2 inches high or less. And yes, they can't go through the walls, but don't forget the rules on page 15 that say you can go through terrain features provided they're 2 inches or less in height without any issues with your movement. So as long as the terrain feature is 2 inches or less, then a vehicle can go through that part of the wall. As soon as it gets to more than 2 inches, then it will absolutely be blocked. But I do see this come up time and time again about that 2 inch rule, and it's a really important one to remember. That doesn't prevent you from going through the walls that way. And in terms of visibility for ruins, there was an update to the core rules, which I've just lumped over the top there. This is found in the balanced data slate on the Warhammer website. It basically just errated a little bit. They've highlighted it in red, but ultimately ruins block line of sight. You can't see through a ruin. If you're not in the ruin and the target that you're looking at to try and shoot is also not in the ruin, on the other side of the ruin, then regardless of whether you can actually physically see that model through a gap in the terrain feature, it might be a window or a door or a bullet hole, if you've got no way of drawing line of sight around that base of the ruin, which you should define as the footprint, then you can't see anything on the other side of it. They fully block line of sight, regardless of whether you can actually get a little bead through some tiny hole in the wall. So that's something to remember and not be caught out when you're playing on tables that are different to your usual tables. They just fully block line of sight. The moment you step into that terrain feature, then models can see into the terrain feature and see you. So those gaps then suddenly will let you become visible, and then you can see out of the terrain feature as well. And I'm going to elaborate on this a bit more for ruins in the members only video. I'm also going to go over some tactics to do with visibility and combat with ruins and ruin walls as well. Ruins are the big feature in competitive or tournaments games at the moment, and it's because you get these nice big solid things that block line of sight, which is a really integral part of creating a balanced game. And I've mentioned in previous videos the importance of using the terrain to your advantage, and you can find those videos here. And for upcoming videos, I'm going to do a breakdown of the different terrain types that we see across different types of events, and how it's important to understand these nuances and differences when we're approaching those games, if we're thinking of attending an event or if we're just playing a game using those formats. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks very much for watching, keep rolling those dice, and stay tuned for more.